Hello all, we are the Eastern 2 group presenting our behavior change project. We'll now take a minute to briefly introduce ourselves, and I'll start us off. My name is Julio Castellanos. I have worked in the field of ABA for about 4 years. I provided services in the clinic setting, home, and school. And I started my master's program in January of 2020, and I anticipate graduating in December of 2020, upon which I will sit for the board, pass, and I'm really interested in the future. I'd like to do some OBM work. I'd like to maybe look into behavior analysis in the forensic psych field, as well as behavioral pharmacology. I just think there's so many different areas that our science can be applied to. And I really look forward to diving into those areas.
Hey everybody, I'm Caitlin Evans. I have worked in the field of ABA for about 2.5 years now. I was working in the clinical setting. I've been working in the clinical setting for about 2.5 years, but I do have a little bit of experience in the school setting and a little bit with telehealth therapy, but my heart is really for the clinic setting. After about a year of working in ABA as an RBT, I applied to do my master's, and I plan to graduate in December of 2020. And then after that, I plan to sit for the BCBA exam and pass. And then I plan on sticking in the clinical setting after I graduate.
Hi everybody, I'm Anne. I've been working in the field of ABA for about 2 years now, and I currently hold a consultant position at the center that I work at. So I have a lot of the same duties as a BCBA, where I have a few different patients on my caseload, and I'm in charge of their programs and analyzing data and training families, which I think is really cool and a lot of really good experience while I'm in this program. I currently work mostly in the home and school settings. I do a little bit of clinical work, but I'll hopefully, once I graduate and become a BCBA, be able to continue working in a lot of different settings.
Hey guys, I'm Sarah. I have been working as an RBT for about 3.5 years now, and in that 3.5 years, I've rotated between all kinds of different settings, school, clinical, community, and in home, and have done a little bit of telehealth as well now that COVID is happening. But yeah, so in that 3.5 years, I have been able to start working as a senior technician at the center that I work at now, which gives me the opportunity to work on client data, assessments, staff trainings, and working on treatment plans. Through all of that, I was really able to realize that I wanted to be a BCBA, so I started the program in August 2019, and will hopefully graduate in May 2021.
Hey guys, I'm Alicia Warmath. I've worked in the field of ABA for about 2 years now. I started the master's program back in May of 2019, and I am so ready to graduate this December 2020. I currently work in a clinic. I have a little bit of experience in a school and doing telehealth, but I think once I pass my exam, I'll either stick with the clinic or I might try and branch out to a school, but who knows?
Sorry. Okay, I am going to cover the original study. The article we chose to replicate is Increasing Physical Activity of Children During School Recess. The authors for this study are Linda B. Hayes and Carol M. Van Camp. It was published in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Analysis in 2015. The purpose of our study was to increase physical activity in children through the use of an intervention package consisting of reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. The independent variable is the intervention package, so that reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. The dependent variable is the number of steps taken in recess by the participants. The participants in this study were 6 8-year-old girls who the authors noted were all part of the same 3rd grade class, and they were all in the same social group. The setting is recess at the school that the participants attended. Materials for this study are Fitbit accelerometers and reinforcers that were $3 or less in value. The design of this study was a single subject research design. They utilized a reversal design and altered between 4 phases total, starting with baseline, then phase 1, a return to baseline, and phase 2. The procedure for this study was right before the 20-minute recess. Each participant was provided with instructions related to the intervention and were all handed Fitbit accelerometers. The researchers used whistles to signal the end of each recess. Baseline. During recess, the participants could not view the Fitbit accelerometer screens, nor did they receive reinforcement or feedback regarding the number of steps they took. Intervention, just a little bit about this, is the intervention package that I've stated before: goal setting, self-monitoring, feedback, and reinforcement. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about each of those and how they played out. The goals for the participant in the first phase was set at a 10% increase from baseline. Once they met this goal for 2 consecutive sessions, another 10% increase from their last 4 sessions was implemented. The goals for the second intervention phase were subsequently 20%, 30%, and 40% increases from the last 4 sessions. The goals were presented to the participants simultaneously, and the participants were able to receive 3 reinforcers at the end of each session if they met all 3 goals in phase 2. The reinforcers were the $3 or less in value and were presented immediately after recess. During recess, the participants were encouraged to view their Fitbit screens and compare their steps with their goals. After recess, participants were asked to report to the researcher to show their results and receive tangible reinforcement and feedback accordingly. Results of this study were that each participant had an increase in steps. There was an average 47% increase in steps taken during the 20-minute recess sessions. The baseline mean for steps taken across all participants was 1,326 steps. The mean for steps taken in intervention was 1,956 steps. 4 of the participants took 100 steps per minute during recess. The amount of steps taken decreased in the reversal to baseline phase, some reaching initial baseline levels. Once the intervention was re-implemented, 4 participants met their 40% step increase goal. The other participants met their 30% increase goal. 1 participant was absent and did not complete the study. The researchers concluded that the intervention was successful in increasing steps taken for the participants. A little bit about IOA and treatment fidelity for our study. A secondary Fitbit was worn on one of the participants for each session. The data collection from this Fitbit was compared to the primary Fitbit worn to calculate IOA data. Agreement was calculated at an average of 95% for all participants. And our study did not specify how they ensured treatment fidelity.
So approximately 50 to 60% of adults adults spend approximately 50 to 60% of the day engaging in sedentary behaviors. This can lead to increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and other health issues. This accounts for 6% of all healthcare expenses. So after looking at that data, our group decided that we wanted to replicate the original study mentioned on adults rather than children. So the purpose of our study was to replicate the study on the effects of an intervention on increasing physical activity by Hayes and Van Camp, as Sarah talked about. The current study is evaluating these effects on 5 graduate students during walking sessions. So rather than evaluating the effects on the children, we're evaluating the effects on adults.
So going into a little bit of the past literature on the chosen behavior and the intervention package, Richardson et al. Aimed to measure the impact of an online community on participant attrition and step counts during an intervention. So 324 participants who qualified as either overweight, had been diagnosed with diabetes, or heart disease were chosen to participate in the study, and they were already members of some sort of online walking intervention. After the participants were chosen, they were separated into either a control group or a community group. Participants of all groups were given a pedometer to track their step count each day, but the difference between the groups was that the participants in the community group were able to post their step counts, communicate with others about different strengths and challenges during the intervention. They were able to receive praise and encouragement from their other group members, whereas the control group did not have access to the community aspect of the study. Those in the control group simply recorded their step counts each day and submitted them to researchers. Both participants in the control group and the community group increased their daily step counts during the duration of the study, but significantly more members of the community group actually completed the walking program than members of the control group did. So this suggested to us that being part of a community, even if it's just an online community, leads to higher motivation for behavior change. In 2017, Epton and Curry conducted a meta-analysis with the purpose of determining how exactly goal setting could be optimized to result in the biggest changes in behavior. So in order to do this, they had 3 different criteria for studies that could be included in the study. The first criterion was that the study must have both an experimental and a control condition in order to compare the effects of the intervention of goal setting. Participants must have been randomized in the study, and the identified dependent variable must have been the variable targeted by goal setting for either increase or decrease. So researchers located articles using 4 different search engines, and they located 141 different studies that fit all 3 of the criteria. They then analyzed the type of goal implemented, the number of times a goal was set, goal difficulty, and the method of setting goals. And these results illustrated that the type of goal set, the number of goals set, and the number of times that the goal was repeated did not have any significant effect on the outcome of the dependent variable, but the difficulty of the goal set did have a significant effect, to where easy to moderately challenging goals had pretty small effects, but difficult but achievable goals had the largest effect on the outcome of behavior. They also found that goals that were set publicly and goals that were set face-to-face had a significant effect on the outcome of the target behavior. Finally, Husty, Normand, and Larson conducted a study with the purpose of measuring changes in physical activity in preschoolers using an intervention package very similar to the study that we replicated, where they included goal setting, feedback, and reinforcement as the package. So this study only included 2 participants. Both were typically developing 4-year-olds, 1 boy and 1 girl. All of the baseline and intervention sessions in the study consisted of 20-minute activity sessions where participants could choose any form of physical activity from running, walking, jump roping, kickball, really anything that they could have done at recess was included in this activity session. So beginning with the baseline session, researchers attached a pedometer to each participant with the screen covered so that they could not see their step counts. And then during the first intervention phase, the researchers took the participants' 5 most recent step counts from their baseline and determined that they put them in order and determined that the 3rd step count was going to be their goal for the next session. They then wrote this on a sticky note and placed it on the pedometer during the intervention phase so that the participants could be viewing their goal during the activity session. They also provided the children with feedback and praise and encouragement halfway through each session during the intervention phase. And if the participants met their goal during these phases, they were given a prize that they got to choose out of a treasure chest. So this article did not specify the criteria for returning to baseline and moving on to phase 2. However, the second baseline and intervention phases were conducted in the same manner as the first. So the results of this study showed that child 1 met his STEP goals for nearly 80% of sessions, and child 2 met her STEP goals for close to 70% of sessions, showing moderately significant results. So this study a couple limitations of the study was that it didn't differentiate between the types of activity that the children were allowed to choose, and they also did not conduct preference assessments, which could have led to a decrease in motivation to actually reach their STEP goals during the intervention phases. So all of these studies illustrated various aspects of the interventions that we replicated and how they can have effects on increasing STEP counts when they are combined, such as the online community that we used and provided each other, setting difficult goals, and receiving feedback and reinforcement from each other.
So the current study evaluated the effects that reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback had on physical activity in the form of steps taken during walking sessions. So for the replication study that we did, all participants consisted of 5 graduate students, 1 male and 4 females. 1 student acted as both the participant and the researcher. Walking sessions took place 1 to 4 times a week by each participant in their own neighborhoods. They lasted 20 minutes total, so they started at 5 o'clock and ended at 5:20 p.m. The materials that we used included smartphones, 2 apps on those smartphones, so the Pacer, pedometer, and step tracker app, and the Fitbit app. Masking tape was used, a timer, tangible reinforcers, and paper. All the participants used their smartphones to track their steps during their application study, and this was done by downloading both of those apps, the Pacer, pedometer, step tracker, and the Fitbit. The Fitbit was downloaded to ensure reliability. So masking tape was used during baseline phases and was placed over the devices to cover the amount of steps taken. The timer was used to signal the beginning and the end of each walking session, and slips of paper were used during the intervention phases with the participants' daily goals and step totals on the slip of paper prior to the session. And lastly, tangible reinforcers were used throughout the study. Each tangible reinforcer was selected by using a multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment, and were under $3 total. So the behavior that we targeted was the number of steps taken. We define this as steps where the movement of lifting 1 foot and putting it down in a position that shifts the weight of the body and allows the individual to move towards another direction. After the first foot is planted on the ground, the opposite foot will lift and be put down as described above. The feet will alternate this movement, shifting the weight of the body in new directions. So an example of this would be Joseph alternated lifting each foot and planting it on the floor, shifting the weight of his body towards the refrigerator to eat a snack. And a non-example would be Joseph turned his torso to look to the right with both feet staying planted firmly on the ground. All right, so data collection. In order to collect data for this replication study, like I said, we downloaded the the Pacer and pedometer step tracker application to our smartphones. And like I also stated above, to track reliability, we use the Fitbit app to also track step data. Data was then placed into an Excel spreadsheet for each individual, and for each session of the study. So frequency recording was used to track the number of steps taken during each of our walking sessions. For the design, we used a reversal to baseline single subject research design to demonstrate whether we had a functional relationship between baseline and intervention phases. And each of the intervention phases consisted of reinforcement, goal setting, self-monitoring, and feedback. All right, so during baseline, the participants downloaded the Pacer and Fitbit apps to the smartphones. We shared the Pacer pedometer and step tracker app along with the Fitbit app information with the researcher of the study. The participants engaged in step-taking behavior 1 to 4 times weekly for 20-minute sessions with each of those apps running on their phones. So sessions took place outside in each participant's neighborhoods, Monday through Thursday, 5 to 5:20 p.m. If the participants were unable to complete a walking session during Monday through Thursday due to weather or other circumstances, they completed the session on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. They did not view the data tracked for the amount of steps taken during the baseline session. Masking tape was placed over the participants' devices to ensure that they were unable to see the number of steps that they were taking during baseline. They did not receive feedback from the researcher either. Data was collected by the researcher by viewing the number of steps taken for that session because they had it shared. Data was then recorded on a Google spreadsheet. The researcher determined whether there was a stability or a lack of an upward trend in the data before moving out of the baseline phase. And then the intervention phase, participants were provided their step counts for the last 4 sessions and their step goal. So the researcher calculated and provided each participant with their step goal prior to beginning each walking session. The participants were all encouraged to review the goals throughout their sessions as well. The goals were set based on an average amount of steps taken during the baseline phase determined by the researcher, and the participants' goals for the first intervention phase was a 10% increase of the last 4 stable sessions. So before beginning the intervention phase, participants chose their own reinforcers. Like stated above, all of them were $3 or less. They engaged in the walking sessions in their own neighborhoods for 20 minutes. Researcher prompted participants to self-report if their goals were met or unmet at the end of each walking session. When participants met their goal for each walking session, they immediately received reinforcement. The goals increased after 2 consecutive sessions of meeting step count goals as well. So they set their next goal, which was a 10% of their first intervention goal. So a 20% increase from baseline data, if that is making sense to everyone so far. Reinforcement and feedback in the form of praise was immediately provided after each session for meeting their goals. Feedback in the form of encouragement was provided if the goal was not met at the end of the session, but they did not receive reinforcement. So when the data was showing evidence of a functional relationship between the intervention phase and target behavior, participants entered the withdrawal phase. This phase was identical to the first baseline phase. And then if it was determined that a stability or lack of an upward trend in data, participants entered the second intervention phase. And this second intervention phase was the same as the first intervention phase, except there will be 3 goals. So the researcher created 3 goals for the second intervention phase. The first goal was a 10% increase from the withdrawal average step count. The second goal was a 20% increase from the withdrawal step count or withdrawal average step count. And the third was a 30% increase from the withdrawal average step count. So then participants earned their chosen reinforcer immediately after meeting each goal and could earn up to 3 reinforcers if they met all 3 goals. And after walking every session, participants recorded their step totals from the Pacer app and the Pacer app, and shared the data with the researcher. And after each session in the intervention phases, the researcher provided feedback in the form of praise if the goal was met and encouragement if the goal was not met. So now we're going to move on to IOA data. So the primary app used was the Pacer, pedometer, and step tracker app. We use the Fitbit app as a secondary app. So IOA data was taken one time each week for each participant, and we calculated the total count IOA, which was calculated by taking the smaller step count. So whichever app calculated the smaller step count and then divided it by the larger step count. And then we multiplied that by 100. And after calculating all of the IOA data, it was determined that it never fell below 98.2%. And there's our data chart. And now we'll move on to treatment fidelity. So to ensure treatment fidelity, the researcher trained all participants in the use of both of the apps. We had a walking checklist and the Google Sheets that we used prior to beginning the study. When the participants were ready to start their walk, they reset the step count on both of the apps. They filled out a walking checklist to guide them through each of the intervention or each step of the intervention. The completed checklist was submitted to the researcher and then reviewed by the researcher. So the walking checklist that is showed on the screen is what we use to ensure fidelity. So if each of the boxes were checked, fidelity was considered 100%. And if boxes weren't checked, fidelity decreased, and the researcher then retrained the participants on the procedures. The researcher called all the participants via Google Hangout at 5:20 when the walking sessions had ended, and each participant told the researcher their step count. So after the participant spoke with the researcher then provided individual feedback to each participant in the form of either praise or encouragement, depending on if they met their goal or not. Each participant then recorded their step count in the shared Google Sheet and stated whether or not they met their goal. The researcher verified or denied that the participant had met their goal and if they had access to reinforcement. So if participants did not meet their goal after 2 sessions, they were provided with additional training, as I explained above. And after filling out and turning in the walking checklist, treatment fidelity was found to be at 100% across all participants during the replication study. And now I will hand it over to Caitlin to discuss the results and conclusion.
Okay, so after collecting all of our data, we found results that in our study showed some similarities to the original study in terms of an increase of step count during intervention phases. However, because of some of our time limitations, some participants did not reach their withdrawal or their second intervention phases. However, all of our participants did show an increase in average step counts from initial baseline to the first intervention phase. It should also be noted that a difference between our study and the original study involves walking versus multiple activities occurring. So in our study, we primarily focus on just a 20-minute walking session, whereas in the original study, children were playing on the playground, and that could include anything from basketball to open field or other playground equipment. And those are all mentioned in the Hayes and Van Camp original study. So moving on, kind of looking at our data more, we did have some mixed results. The average amount of step counts increased from baseline to intervention phase 1 for all participants. However, it did not decrease for each participant in the reversal to baseline. So further, the chart here shows that all of the step count averages for each of the 5 participants. Oh, can we go back one more slide? I'm sorry. And as you can see, in the case of Caitlin, myself, and Anne, the average amount of step counts increased when entering the reversal to baseline, when it should have ideally decreased going back to baseline. So this may be due to the limitation of time constraints that will be discussed later. On the other hand, Alicia, Sarah, and Julio's data all indicate an increase from baseline to intervention phase 1 and a decrease from intervention to reversal. So that just shows that when the intervention package was in place, for those 3 participants, their step counts did increase, and then when the intervention package was removed, their steps did decrease. Additionally, although Caitlin, Alicia, and Anne did not enter into intervention phase 2, due to time constraints, Sarah and Julio did have that chance to do that because they were able to meet their goals more rapidly. Their data shows another increase when the intervention was put back into place, which just further shows that the intervention package was having an effect on step counts. Julio, could you go back one more time? Sorry, thank you. So looking at this data, this shows the percentage increases, whereas the last one just showed the step counts. Looking at percentages, a functional relationship could not be found for 3 of the 5 participants. In the case of Caitlin, Alicia, and Anne, there were not enough data points to determine whether the relationship existed between the dependent variable, which was steps taken, and the independent variables, which was reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback, because they did not complete all 4 phases. So because of this, without that data, there just wasn't enough evidence to show the functional relation. All of these participants showed an increase in step count from baseline to intervention, but results from intervention to reversal to baseline were mixed. For Alicia, there was a 9.8% decrease from intervention to return to baseline, but in the case of Caitlin and Anne, there was not a decrease when returning to baseline. And this just shows that there's no evidence to support that functional relationship between the intervention package and the amount of steps taken. Again, this could be due to time constraints because both Anne and Caitlin only had 1 or 2 data points when reversing to baseline. There was not enough data points to determine a trend. Julio and Sarah's results, on the other hand, did show a functional relationship. Both of these participants had sufficient data in all 4 of their phases. Ability and level of their data showed functional relationship between the amount of steps taken and the intervention package. They both showed an increase in step count from initial baseline to first intervention phase, a decrease from intervention phase to return to baseline, and then an increase when they went from the return to baseline back to the second intervention phase. So this just supports a functional relationship between the dependent and independent variables because there were more steps taken when the interventions were in place, and when the intervention package was removed, their steps decreased. Again, it's important to keep in mind the limited time frame of this study. Since we are 5 graduate students replicating a study for a graduate course, we were limited on our time frame of the study, and therefore we're not able to complete all 4 of the phases. So therefore our results would differ in the case of a longer time frame because there would be more data points to complete all of these phases. Now I'm gonna let Julio take over and present some of the graphs to support the data that I've talked about and discuss limitations.
So as previously mentioned, the study utilized a reversal design. The figures that you see in front of you now display the steps per session across each participant. In the graphs, you'll see horizontal lines. Those horizontal lines indicate the step goals that were given by the researcher during their intervention phase. As you can see, Julio and Sarah on the right-hand side were able to go through each of the phases. So you see baseline phase first. Then you see the first phase of intervention consisting of reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. In that phase, you see both of the step goals. So the first goal, 10% increase from baseline, and the second goal, 20% increase from baseline. Then you will see a return to baseline where we see a change in level in Sarah's graph. In Julio's graph, a slight change in level. You do see a change in trend, so we see a downward trend. And then we return to the intervention, the second phase of the intervention. To the left-hand side, you see Caitlin and Anne's graphical displays, and they were unable to go into the second phase of intervention, again, due to those time constraints that were just mentioned. And in our last graph, you see Alicia's graph. She is also, you see the baseline, first intervention phase, and return to baseline. Again, because of those restraints in time, she was unable to get to that second phase of intervention. I'll now discuss some of the limitations of our study. First and foremost was time constraints, as we've mentioned already. All the participants were not able to complete all of the phases of the study, so they were not able to meet that second intervention phase. So for 3 of the participants, we are not able to conclude a functional relationship. Graphical locations is another limitation that we came across due to us being all graduate students and we were all living in separate states. It was a little tricky getting that observation in real time. One of the ways that we offset that was through a video conferencing platform. However, even with that, we did encounter some complications. A common issue we had was just call failure when we were walking outside due to just coverage. So that was another one. And active versus inactive participants, that's another limitation that we noticed. So our study did not take into account participants that lived in active lifestyle before the study began, as opposed to those with inactive lifestyles before the study began. So we believe that future research should take into account differential rates of walking because of those different lifestyles prior to the study. And that is our conclusion. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone's presentation went well. Everyone be well.
Thank you.